The alert didn't come from a radar, it came from a satellite. At 118 local time, a defense support program early warning satellite in geosynchronous orbit above the Indian Ocean detected the infrared bloom of a ballistic missile motor igniting in western Iran. Then, another. Then 6 more in the same 40-second window. The data hit the Israeli Missile Defense Command Center at Pelmachim Air Base in 11 seconds. Faster than any radar on the ground could have seen it. Faster than any human observer could have reported it. Fast enough that the duty officer had 12 minutes of warning before the first warhead reached Israeli airspace. This was Iran's attack on Israel, the moment both sides had prepared for. 12 minutes sounds like a long time. It isn't. Captain Yael Mizrahi had been the duty officer at Palmachim's Missile Defense Center for 4 hours when the satellite alert fired. 29 years old, 3 years on the Arrow system. She'd run this exact scenario in simulation 40 times. She'd never run it with real missiles and real warheads and real cities behind her that couldn't be moved out of the way. She picked up the direct line to the air defense commander without looking at it. "Sir, satellite detection, 8 ballistic launches, Western Iran. Assess Shahab 3 and Emad variants. Impact prediction window opens in 11 minutes. I need release authority now." The commander was already awake. He'd been awake since the Natan strike 72 hours earlier. Everyone in Israeli air defense had been awake since the Natan strike. Not because they didn't expect retaliation. Because they did. You have release authority, prosecute all tracks. What else is coming? Mizrahi looked at the secondary display where the drone tracking network was already updating. "Sir, we have multiple slow movers lifting off from western Iran and from Hezbollah positions in Lebanon simultaneously. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force confirmed as launch authority. Assess Shahed, 136 one-way attack drones. Count is still building." She paused for 1 second. Current count is 114. 114 drones and 8 ballistic missiles launched inside the same 40-second window. This wasn't a retaliation, it was a doctrine. The Iranian theory of victory against Israeli missile defense wasn't to build a missile that could defeat Arrow or David Sling or Iron Dome individually. It was to launch enough simultaneous threats across enough altitude bands and approach corridors that the defenders ran out of interceptors before Iran ran out of targets. Flood the layers. Force prioritization decisions no computer can make cleanly. Find the gap that opens when everything is pointed somewhere else. Iran had been building toward this salvo for 3 years. Every exercise, every procurement decision, every conversation with Russian and Chinese advisors about layered saturation attack doctrine. It had all been pointed at this exact moment. The moment Israel crossed a line Iran had promised for a decade it would not allow to be crossed. Mizrahi didn't have time to appreciate the sophistication of what was coming at her. She had 11 minutes and 114 drones and 8 ballistic missiles and a layered defense architecture that had never been tested at this scale against a real adversary on a real night with real consequences. She started at the top. Arrow 3. Batteries Alpha and Bravo. Engage all ballistic tracks. Prioritize by predicted impact point. Tel Aviv first, then Haifa, then Dimona. The Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center in the desert. The reason Iran had built this salvo, not to kill civilians, to answer Natanz with Dimona, symmetry as strategy. The Arrow 3 is an exoatmospheric interceptor developed by Israel Aerospace Industries. It leaves the atmosphere to do its job, colliding with ballistic warheads above the air, above the weather, in the cold vacuum where a kinetic impact at closing speeds above Mach 10 produces enough energy to destroy a re-entry vehicle without a warhead. Hit a bullet with a bullet, in space, at night, against a target that is actively trying to defeat your seeker. 8 Arrow 3s left their launchers at Palmachim and Tel Shahar simultaneously. The sky above the Negev lit up briefly and went dark. 8 tracks, 8 interceptors. The math looked clean on the display. It wasn't clean. 2 of the 8 Iranian missiles were different. The satellite had classified all 8 launches as ballistic on the basis of their motor signatures and initial trajectory. It was right. They were all ballistic. What the satellite couldn't see in the 11-second data window was that 2 of the 8 carried maneuvering re-entry vehicles, warheads that could alter their trajectory in terminal phase, pulling lateral Gs that a standard ballistic re-entry vehicle couldn't manage, breaking the predictive intercept geometry that Arrow 3 depended on. The Arrow 3 assigned to Track 4 built its intercept solution on a standard ballistic arc and flew to the point in space where Track 4 was supposed to be. Track 4 wasn't there. It had pulled 4 lateral Gs at 60 kilometers altitude, shifting its impact point 40 kilometers east of the predicted coordinates. The Arrow 3 detonated in empty space. The warhead continued its descent toward a revised impact point that the fire control system needed 6 seconds to recalculate. 6 seconds at Mach 8 terminal velocity is 14 kilometers of closure. Arrow 3 miss on Track 4. Re-engaging. Arrow 2, Battery Charlie, take Track 4. Arrow 2 is the atmospheric interceptor. It engages inside the atmosphere where aerodynamic control surfaces work and where the warhead has less room to maneuver. The engagement envelope was tighter. The geometry was uglier. Battery Charlie had a valid firing solution for 4 seconds before Track 4 entered the terminal phase and the intercept window closed. They fired in second 2. The Arrow 2 found Track 4 at 18 kilometers altitude and detonated its fragmentation warhead 6 meters from the re-entry vehicle, close enough to damage the warhead casing, not close enough to destroy it. Track 4 was still descending, damaged, tumbling, unpredictable. David Sling, Battery Delta. Track 4, terminal engagement. Now. David Sling was designed for exactly this. The medium layer. The gap between Arrow's exoatmospheric domain and Iron Dome's short-range terminal defense. Ballistic missiles in their final seconds of flight. Cruise missiles at medium altitude. The threats that fall between the other systems' optimal engagement envelopes. Battery Delta had been tracking Track 4 since the Arrow 2 near miss and had a continuous firing solution updating at 10 times per second. 2 stunner interceptors left the rails. Track 4 was tumbling, which made its radar cross-section irregular and its trajectory unpredictable in a way that a clean re-entry vehicle never was. The first stunner lost its lock in the final 3 kilometers when the tumbling warhead's radar return dropped below the seeker's threshold for half a second. It passed within 40 meters and detonated its proximity warhead. The fragmentation pattern caught the warhead casing on the edge of the lethal radius. The casing cracked. The second stunner hit the debris cloud 0.3 seconds later and detonated inside it. Track 4 came apart at 4 kilometers altitude over the northern Negev. The warhead did not achieve nuclear initiation. The casing fragments and conventional explosive fillers scattered across 2 square kilometers of empty desert. 3 brush fires started. No casualties. Mizrahi logged it as a kill. Technically, it was. Practically, it had taken 3 interceptors from 3 different systems to stop one maneuvering warhead that had already defeated the first engagement attempt. She looked at the board. Track 4 resolved. Tracks 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 resolved by Arrow 3 in the exoatmosphere. Track 8 still active. Where is Track 8? Captain, Track 8 separation event at 80 kilometers. We have 2 objects. A decoy. Track 8 had released a decoy in the exoatmosphere, splitting the radar return into 2 objects with similar signatures. The Arrow 3 assigned to Track 8 had followed the decoy. The warhead was still descending. Unengaged, 80 kilometers from Israeli territory and falling at Mach 9. Arrow 3 reload status. Battery Alpha is reloading. 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Track 8 had 90 seconds to impact. David Sling, all available batteries. Track 8, maximum effort, 3 batteries. 6 stunner interceptors. The fire control system distributed the engagement to prevent redundant targeting of the decoy object and maximize probability of kill on the warhead. The discrimination algorithm had 40 seconds to classify which object was the warhead and which was the decoy before the engagement geometry closed. It needed 38. Track 8 primary object classified. Warhead assessed object Bravo. Decoy assessed object Alpha. 4 of the 6 stunners redirected to object Bravo. 2 continued on Object Alpha as insurance against a misclassification that nobody in the room wanted to contemplate. Object Bravo was the warhead. The algorithm was right. 3 of the 4 stunners found it between 22 and 19 kilometers altitude in a 3-second engagement sequence that the fire control system executed faster than any human operator could have authorized. The warhead came apart at 19 kilometers over the Mediterranean west of Haifa. The debris fell into open water. No casualties, no contamination. Mizrahi exhaled once and looked at the drone picture. The drone picture was worse than the missile picture. 114 Shed 136 one-way attack drones don't arrive together. They arrive in waves, staggered by launch time and route, designed to hit the air defense network from multiple directions across a 40-minute window that starts before the ballistic missiles land and ends after the missile defense crews think the engagement is over. The timing is deliberate. Exhausted operators, reloading systems. The moment of institutional exhale after the big threats are down. That's when the drones arrive at the target. Iron Dome, manufactured by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, was already active on 12 batteries positioned across northern and central Israel. The system's battle management radar classifies each drone contact and builds a firing solution, then makes a decision no human operator has time to make at drone engagement timescales. Whether the drone's projected impact point is a populated area worth defending or empty ground that can absorb the hit without an interceptor. It doesn't waste $50,000 Tamir interceptors on drones heading for fields, especially when each drone cost Iran only $20,000 to manufacture. Of the 114 drones, Iron Dome's battle management assessed 67 as threats to populated or critical infrastructure areas. The remaining 47 were assessed as impacting unpopulated zones and were tracked but not engaged. 67 threats, 12 batteries, each battery carrying 20 Tamir interceptors at full load. The math worked. Barely. Iron Dome engaged the first wave of 23 drones at 142 across a front stretching from Kiryat Shmona in the north to Be'er Sheva in the south. Intercept rate on Wave 1 was 21 of 23. 2 drones in Wave 1 penetrated the engagement envelope. 1 impacted an industrial building in the northern port city of Acre. Structural damage. 4 injuries. No fatalities. The second impacted a road junction south of Haifa. No casualties. Wave 2 arrived at 151. 31 drones. Iron Dome engaged 19 of the 31 assessed as threats. Intercept rate on Wave 2 was 17 of 19. 2 penetrated. One of those 2 was heading for Tel Aviv. Battery 7 had been the reserve battery. Positioned south of Tel Aviv, held back from the first 2 wave engagements to preserve interceptors for exactly this scenario. The battery commander, Lieutenant Oren Shapiro, 26 years old, 2 years on Iron Dome, had been watching the engagement picture since 118 and had not fired a single interceptor. Holding the reserve while every other battery around him was shooting required a discipline that nobody talks about in the capability briefings. He'd held it. The drone from Wave 2 that was heading for Tel Aviv was a modified Shahed 136. Longer range variant, slightly different radar cross-section. It had flown a route that took it south of the standard Iron Dome engagement corridor before turning north toward the city, approaching from a bearing that 2 batteries had assessed as low threat and not engaged. Shapiro's radar had it at 34 kilometers. The battle management system assessed impact point as central Tel Aviv. High-density residential and commercial area. It generated an automatic engagement order and allocated 2 Tamir interceptors. Shapiro watched the solution build. Watched the 2 Tamirs track the drone across 28 kilometers of night sky. Watched the first Tamir detonate 4 meters from the drone's airframe. The drone kept flying. A 4-meter miss with a proximity warhead should have been a kill. The Shahed's warhead casing had been reinforced. Someone in an Iranian engineering facility had looked at Iron Dome's intercept data from previous engagements and made a modification that cost less than $200 and forced a second interceptor expenditure on every engagement. The second Tamir was already on the way. It found the damaged drone at 8 kilometers from the Tel Aviv city boundary and detonated inside the engine compartment. The drone came down in a residential neighborhood in Bat Yam, south of Tel Aviv. The warhead achieved partial initiation on impact. 12 buildings sustained damage, 19 civilians were injured, 2 were killed. Shapiro logged the engagement and immediately allocated his remaining interceptors across the wave 3 picture that was already building on his display. He didn't stop. Nobody in the room stopped. You don't stop on a night like this because stopping is the one thing the architecture of the attack is designed to make you do. Wave 3 arrived at 203, 20 drones. Iron Dome was running low on interceptors across 4 northern batteries. Shapiro's reserve had kept the central sector viable. The northern sector was making prioritization decisions that nobody had wanted to make. Which threats got interceptors and which threats got tracked until impact because the magazine was empty. 3 drones in Wave 3 hit targets in northern Israel. Agricultural infrastructure, a power substation, a road bridge over the Jordan River that would take 6 weeks to repair. At 219, the last drone contact dropped off the display. The engagement was over. Mizrahi wrote her preliminary report at 241. 8 ballistic missiles defeated, 6 in the exoatmosphere, 1 by David Sling after an Arrow 3 miss, 1 by 3 system engagement after a decoy separation event. 91 of 114 drones defeated by Iron Dome. 23 drones impacted Israeli territory. 5 in populated or infrastructure areas. 2 civilian fatalities, 41 injuries, significant but recoverable infrastructure damage in the north. The defense had held, technically, 2 civilian fatalities in a power substation and a bridge and 19 people in a hospital in Bat Yam because a $200 modification to a drone's warhead casing forced a second interceptor expenditure, and the second interceptor arrived 0.3 seconds later than the engagement solution required. 0.3 seconds. She put the number in the report without comment. The analysts would comment on it for months. The engineers would build something to answer it. The operators would run the simulation with the new data until 0.3 seconds was no longer the margin that determined whether a drone reached a city. Outside the Palmachim Command Center, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. The Iron Dome batteries were being reloaded. The Arrow launchers were cycling new interceptors into their cells. The David Sling batteries were running post-engagement diagnostics that would take 4 hours to complete. In Tehran, the damage assessment teams were looking at satellite imagery of the Natanz facility and the interceptor data from the salvo and writing their own reports. 8 ballistic missiles defeated. 91 drones shot down, 2 Israeli civilians killed. They had fired everything they had prepared for 3 years. Israel was still there. The next folder was already open.